Anyone here want to see some rare vintage planars? From 1978, the true origin of the Elega FR-901C, or rather its drivers, is not clear. The Akai SAE50, Victor HPD50, and the Audiotronic AHP66, which is an OEM of the FR-901C, as far as we can tell at this point, all use exactly the same driver, or at least what appears to be the same driver. The Victor HPD70 also appears to use a variant of this driver with anisotropic ferrite, but without collecting all the Infinity drivers and studying them, we'll never know for sure, since most information about these has likely been lost to history. However, looking at release dates only, it appears that Victor was first. But with Elega's proven history of being a prolific OEM supplier, it's anyone's guess at this point, unless someone can come forward with more than anecdotal evidence. The Elega FR-901C is one of those simple beauties, with extremely flat, round cups that barely contain the drivers and internal wiring, are connected to the simplest of headbands, dressed on top with a thin artificial leather. With weight and clamping force evenly distributed, most of the discomfort of wearing this headphone comes from the pressure applied directly to the ears through its pancake-thin ear pads. But don't let that take away from just how good this headphone design is. Every single aspect of the design appears to follow, as simplistically as possible, the function of the headphone. The plastic adjustment sliders of the headband have angles that follow the headband shape. The woven steel mesh is one of the most acoustically transparent and robust materials, but also adds a touch of aesthetic flair. I think it stays true to Elega's history of producing functional tools built to high specifications, and for me personally remains one of the best looking headphones ever made. The ear pads are certainly the weakest point of the build. They do very little to serve the wearer unless they have a penchant for masochism, although they do provide enough of a bass seal to make these planars sing adequately. This is where things get a bit different. Under the ear pads, as you can see, is nothing. There's a unique trick to opening up these headphones. The front faceplate actually has a twist lock mechanism, so let's quickly take this off and have a look inside. I need to preserve the orientation of the woven mesh to make my life easier when reassembling. Directly under the woven mesh is a moderately thick piece of rough black paper, acting as a damping material. Then under that again is a thick piece of card adhered directly to the driver magnet, acting as a treble reflector. Now, due to how simply and wonderfully this driver is designed, we can very easily take a look inside at the driver. The screw at 1 o'clock is longer than the others, so make sure to put it back in the correct place. I would have personally preferred to open up the right side since it has less cables to deal with and therefore a bit more breathing room, but the paper on that side is glued to both the driver housing and the wire mesh, so this is the easier side to open. Out of all the headphones and drivers I have disassembled over the years, this is actually one of the least stressful. The magnets don't have much repelling force, and the entire rear half of the housing remains partially seated, even after all the screws are loose, so it should be a very simple matter for anyone servicing these in the future. Incidentally, my copy comes with a rare fingerprint from whoever was assembling these in the factory. I'm not sure what this print is made of, possibly the glue used to adhere the diaphragm to this housing. At least it does not appear to have any audible detriment to the sound. Anyhow, on the diaphragm we can clearly see a more angular serpentine trace not entirely dissimilar to that used on the Fostex T50 and NAD RP18, with what appears to be some emphasis on the trace covering as much of the surface area as possible. The interesting thing about this driver is that even in this open state, it still works, with only one side of the magnets present. I would however not recommend modifying this headphone to run with single-sided magnets. I have attempted this before with an OEM clone, the Audiotronic AHP66, and the benefit gained from the improved treble, airiness and openness was not enough to overcome the severely weakened bass response. I've come to really enjoy playing around with vintage headphones using only a simple headphone amp with tone controls. For this, I use the Fuzzy Audio SK01, which is basically a small desktop version of the type of tone controls that would have been present on most vintage stereo amplifiers and AV receivers. The bass and treble provide tasteful shelves for both extremes, and the peak of the mid-range is focused at 1000 Hz. Without any tone control, this headphone sounds boxy and really vintage. Imagine you're listening to your stereo system, but it's next door in the bathroom, and the door is almost completely closed, and your speakers only have mid-range woofers. That's the kind of tone and presentation you get. Looking at the frequency response graph, which was measured with my mini DSP ears, it is clear to see that there are some problems. The mid-range has that typical Stax lambda bow shape with a touch too much emphasis around 100 and 1000 Hz. Fortunately, because of what we know about measuring headphones, specifically with poor bass seal between the headphone and the measuring rig, the bump at 100 Hz is actually a measuring artifact. The reality is that the bass measures more linear than what is shown, but the amount of roll-off is unfortunately somewhat realistic. The dip at 4 kHz, we don't mind. That's not entirely unwelcome, as it sounds natural to many ears and has been known to artificially increase soundstage. The treble, however, does sound as rolled off as it looks. So, fortunately, to fix all of this is a simple matter of twisting a few knobs. Treble actually gets the biggest boost, up to around 4 o'clock, then bass up to around 2, and finally mids get turned down a touch to around 11 o'clock. Okay, that's not entirely true, it's still not perfect, but it's still amazing just how far these controls can take you, something that would have been taken for granted in the 70s. Generally, I can't fully recommend pad rolling with these headphones. As soon as you put anything deeper and more comfortable, the tone and timbre is quickly destroyed. I think with most headphones, it's only a matter of trying out some pads and narrowing it down to the correct pad over time. But in this case, I think it will be quite difficult, as none of my pads have helped. Despite the ability of this planar, like most, to take very large doses of tone correction without even breaking a sweat, I would still rank this headphone at most at B tier for vintage planars. The excessive rear damping, while it does a lot to help the treble that would have been impossible to achieve with tone correction alone, also makes these headphones sound very small. Music feels kind of brick-walled, with depth and dynamics suffering the most. Ultimately, the technical ability to render detail is also missing the mark. It would also have been something of a weak contender among all planars in the late 70s, as it was priced higher than the Fostex T30 and Yamaha HP1, both of which outclass it by more than a margin. As such, this is one for the collectors only. There aren't enough tone controls in the world that can bring this to a place of true musical enjoyment, but as a piece of Japanese planar design history, I have nothing but appreciation. Take it easy, and I'll see you in the next one.